Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to Your Thought for Thursday. I am Karma with Lewis Acre Farm. We are continuing our series on the names of God, and we're reading The Peace and Power of Knowing God's Name by Kay Arthur. If you would like to get a copy of the book for yourself, you can find it on Amazon and also on thrift books and other used book websites and apps, possibly also in your local used bookstores or Christian bookstores. At the beginning of this video, you will have noticed that there is a trigger warning. You wouldn't expect to find that when we're doing a Bible study on the names of God. However, the author of the book addresses some topics that we'll be covering both as we read and in discussion that could potentially be triggering to some people. I do just want to put that out there so that you are aware before we get started. When I started reading chapter 3 of this book, it hit me hard, and it also brought some healing for me. And I hope, my prayer is that those of you who hear this week's episode of Your Thought for Thursday will also find healing and release from those areas in your life that have been holding you back, those areas in your life that you've been struggling with. This particular name of God is absolutely incredible. I think I'm going to say that about every one of the names that we study, because my God is so incredible. He's so awesome, and he's my everything. He truly is my everything. And I hope, and my prayer is that each of you can find that as you come to a greater understanding of God's name, his names. Remember in the beginning we talked about how God is like his all-encompassing name, his first name. And each of these names that we're looking at are like his middle names. They're his defining names. It's like looking at a prism and seeing new facets of God, his characteristics, his personalities, his personality traits, I guess is how I should put that. It's like finding out something new about God every time you hear a new name of God. It's showing you a new facet to God each time you discover something new about him. Kind of like when you're in a new relationship with your partner. When you meet that new special someone, the more time that you spend with them, the more you learn about them, the more you find out about them, and the more that you find out their personality, their likes, their dislikes. You find out they might have a very witty but dry sense of humor, or you might find out that they love fried chicken but hate barbecued chicken, or maybe they're extremely talented. Perhaps they play an instrument and you didn't know that when you first met, but you learn these little things along the way as you get to know them. And so learning the names of God is important because you find out new little things, and they're really not so little, but you find out new character traits about God and new aspects of who God is as you get to know God. And that's what makes this study of the names of God so vital to us as we walk with God. Okay, so let's begin. Chapter 3, El ROI, the God who sees. For the ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he watches all his paths. Proverbs 5:21. Thrown out like a soiled, worthless rag, used for another's pleasure and then tossed aside. It was too much. It was more than she could handle. Feeling like an outcast, she bundled a few of her things together and headed out the door, vowing never to return. That's one day in the life of Hagar, the maid of Sarai, and the one who bore the son of Sarai's husband, Abraham. Have you ever known such a day in your life? Have you ever known what it means to be thrown out, completely rejected? You fulfilled someone's pleasure, and then you weren't wanted anymore. Did you run away? Were you put out on the street? Did you find yourself wondering if there was some way in which you failed or were inadequate? Maybe if you had behaved differently. Maybe if you had been more than you were. Maybe if you had... The expectations go on and on, don't they? People tell you that it wasn't your fault, that you weren't the only one in the wrong. But right or wrong, you feel the rejection deep inside, and with rejection comes that crushing feeling of inadequacy. Where is God, you ask? Where is Elohim, the Creator God, who designed me for His will and His purposes? Where is El Elyon, this sovereign God who promises that all things work together for good? Does He really know what's going on? Does He see? Yes, He sees. It is His very name. He is El ROI, the God who sees. The omnipresent God is there, and His eyes are not shut. He isn't asleep. He isn't caught off guard, and He isn't hindered by the darkness. God sees. Hagar discovered this soon after she fled from the tense situation in her home. Thirsty, probably lonely, and exhausted, she eventually threw herself down by a spring of water in the desert wilderness. Where would she go? What would she do? What would become of her? What would happen to the child she carried in her womb? It was a big, empty world in those ancient days, and an utterly frightening one for a young, pregnant slave girl with broken family ties and no prospects. It's not too difficult to imagine Hagar weeping her heart out by that little spring in a wild, barren land. She had no doubt heard Abraham speak of this El Elyon, this powerful possessor of heaven and earth. Where was he now? Did he care about someone as lowly as a servant girl? Did he see her in her grief and great distress? Do you ever wonder? Have you ever been in a situation similar to this? Have you ever felt used, abused, tossed aside? Been in a situation where you could never do right? Nothing you said, nothing you did measured up? I have. I've been there. It's not fun. If I would have understood El Roi, the God who sees, all those years ago, if I would have known the names of God, if I would have known that I had a strong tower to run to, all the hurts, all the scars that are inside of me could have been healed so long ago. But I praise God that I'm learning now. And how many times have we poured our heart out next to a stream in the wilderness and cried out, do you even exist? Do you even see? Do you even know what I'm going through right now, God? Do you even know what they have done to me? I know I have. I know I have. And the beauty of it is, so long as you do not curse God, you can be angry and sin not. You can be angry at God and cry out and pour your heart out at God, to God, and express your heart, so long as you do not sin, so long as you do not curse God. And He will hear you, and He will answer you, and He will give you the peace that you need, because He sees you. I get ahead of myself here. Let's see. Just about that time, as she pondered these things, Hagar had a visitor. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from, and where are you going? And she said, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress, Sarai. Genesis 16, verses 7 through 8. This was none other than the Lord Himself in the form of an angel. How can I say that? Because He speaks as the Lord in verse 10. He says, I will greatly multiply your descendants. And Hagar, like another desolate woman at another, millennia later, discovers some amazing things about God in those moments by the spring. He knows right where to find her. He knows her name. He knows her occupation. He knows her heartaches at home. He knows about the child in her womb, what his name will be, and what kind of man he will become. What is more, He knows her future. He knows her destiny. How awed and amazed that little maid must have been. Listen to her response. Then she called the name of the Lord, who spoke to her. Thou art a God who sees. For she said, have I even remained alive after seeing Him? Therefore the well was called Bir Lahai Roi, the well of the living one who sees me. Genesis 16, verses 13 and 14. The Lord had said to her, where have you come from and where are you going? There was concern for Hagar's past and her future in that question. It was as if the Lord was saying, where have you been, Hagar? What has hurt you? Why are you running? What will happen to you if you keep running and running like this? Many times when we are mistreated, used by someone who we trusted or respected, we tend to run away from the situation, or we seek to bury it. The memory of it, the emotions, the rejection all seem too much to bear, so we stuff it. I guess we think that if we stuff it, it will go away. I know I'm guilty of stuffing a lot. And it hurts even more to unpack it once we've stuffed it in, buried it so deep. But our computer-like memory bank stores it. Then something happens and the program is called up and replayed on the screen of our memory. The pain, the bitterness, the recriminations are too much. So once again, it's stuffed. You remember at the beginning of this video, I gave you a trigger warning? How many of us have what we call triggers because of things that have happened in the past? And those triggers happen because we have not dealt with the situation at the time that it happened. I know that for myself, I can only speak for myself. There are things that I have PTSD from. There are things that I have phobias of. And I know that had I been able to confront those things at the time that they happened, I would not have those deep, deep-rooted fears that I have now. If I did have the fears, they wouldn't be the intense fears that they are now. But because I was not able to deal with them, they were stuffed down, pushed aside, dismissed, made fun of in some cases, ridiculed. They hurt worse. And I think that's what the author is getting at in this chapter here. But our computer-like memory bank stores it, then something happens, and the program is called up and replayed on the screen of our memory. The pain, the bitterness, the recriminations are too much. So once again, it's stuffed. Some time ago, I did 5 television programs on incest. The mail flooded in for weeks afterward, and it wasn't easy mail to read. I wept. I hurt. I was horrified. How could people do things like this to one another? How many people told their story for the first time? Years had passed, yet for most, there had been no healing. They had stuffed it, run away from it, covered it over. Some even wondered if they were dreaming. How could anything so unnatural, so horrible, be real? But they knew they weren't dreaming. How could they ever be whole? Can any abused person, any person used for another's perverted pleasure, ever be whole? Whether it be sexual, mental, or physical abuse, can there be healing? Yes. Healing has to be possible. Otherwise, a sovereign God of love would surely have intervened. But where does healing begin? It begins with recognition of ROI. It begins with the God who sees. He was awake. He was aware. He saw it all. The first time we meet God in the Word as ROI, we find him telling Hagar to go back and deal with the situation. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit yourself to her authority." Genesis 16:9. If you have been a victim of incest or abuse or any other injustices, you need to get it out. You need to face it and deal with what happened as it really was. God saw it all. There is no hiding the facts from him. For the ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he watches all his paths. Proverbs 5:21. God sees all. He knows the sin that was committed against you, and someday, beloved, he will vindicate you. There is forgiveness, but to those who refuse to receive the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world, there is also a day of judgment. And it will be a righteous judgment, for God's gaze misses nothing. 2 Thessalonians 1, verses 5 through 10. I struggled when I was reading this. I really struggled because I thought, if God saw what was happening to me, to you, to my sister, if he was there, why didn't he step in? Why didn't he stop it? Why did he allow it to happen? Why? And then I thought about some of the other truths that are in the Bible and the other names that we've already looked at. When Elohim created the earth, when Elohim created man, he created man with a free will. And God cannot violate our free will. He will not violate our free will. Man, as in humanity, has the free will to make choices. And man has a choice whether or not to sin. When we choose, we as humanity choose to hurt another human being through abuse of any nature. If God stepped in, he would be violating free will. Now, he can stir up the hearts of other people and drop the thoughts into the minds of others to go and intervene. But if those people do not hear his voice, if they do not heed his warning to go and check on that child, to go and check on that man, that woman who's being abused, because yes, it happens to men too. If the person who's being prompted does not step up to the plate, they have that choice. If they don't hear God's voice and they do not heed his word and step in, again, God cannot violate our will. So then where does that leave us? We take a look at El Elyon, Most High. He is our strong tower. He is Most High. And we looked at how God makes no mistakes. When he creates us, he created even people with autism, Down syndrome, any number of so-called deformities. They are perfect in God's sight. There's nothing imperfect about them. There's nothing imperfect about you and I. Things that we call flaws are perfections in God's eyes. We are made perfect in his image. So if humanity chooses to sin and cause harm, God can take that, what man meant for evil, what Satan meant for evil, he can take that and use that for good if we allow him to. And one way that we can allow him to is by dealing with it instead of stuffing it. I hope that helps to clear up the why. Because I had a lot of whys. Why weren't you there? Why didn't you protect me? Why didn't you? God has greater purpose. He's going to take those hurts and use them for his glory, if I allow him to. So let's go ahead and move on. After you realize that he sees, you need to know that in his sovereignty, he permitted what happened. Therefore, as horrible and as destructive as it seems, in God's economy, it will be used for good if you will but know him, believe him, and put your trust in his name. For he does not forsake those who seek him. Psalm 9, verse 10. That is one way it helps to know his name, El ROI. Let me mention another. If you have loved ones who have run away or cut themselves off from communication, you may have no idea where they are or what is happening in their lives. But El ROI does. He knows where they have come from and where they are going. He knows what they are thinking and feeling in the deepest part of their hearts. He sees it all, right now, at this very instant. You can't, but he can. We recently received a letter at Precept Ministries telling the story of a woman who ran into the tower of El ROI and found him true to his name. Darlene had spent many years in a women's correctional facility in Arkansas. She began attending a precept class there in prison and found herself deeply touched by a study on the names of God. The week her class studied El ROI was very moving to her. She wrote the name down on a slip of paper and carried it with her everywhere. Darlene had been sentenced to a long prison term while her little boy was still in elementary school. She had not seen him for many years, but had learned that as a teenager he had become involved with gangs and drugs. At the age of 16, he had run away from his father's home and had not been heard from since. How many of you have had loved ones that you've lost touch with or that have gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd and you've been praying them home? El ROI sees. He knows. Darlene, however, never stopped thinking about him as the long years slipped by, worrying about him, longing for him. If he was still alive, he would be 27 years old. Darlene knew he was most likely dead, but still, while there was hope, she prayed. Every time she became anxious about her son, she pulled the slip of paper from her pocket and thought about the name she had written there. El ROI, the God who sees. God knew where her son was, even if she didn't. God could see him, and perhaps he would have mercy on a broken-hearted mother and allow her to see her boy again. Within a few weeks of the study on El ROI, while the prison group was still studying the names of God together, Darlene received a phone call from a hospital in Texas. Her son was alive. He had been having mental problems from his extensive drug use and was under treatment. Somehow the hospital had been able to track down the man's mother in an Arkansas prison. Then they put him on the line, and this dear woman spoke with her son for the first time in many long years. Isn't that beautiful? God is so, so awesome. He's just too magnificent for words. Our human words just don't do God justice. She had the name El Roi in her pocket and in her heart. He had seen her in her need, and he had been merciful. You can trust him too, beloved. You must trust him. He alone is absolutely trustworthy. Run into the strong fortress of his name and rest. This chapter has been a difficult one, but also a liberating one. My prayer for you this week is that if you have gone through any kind of abuse, any kind of trauma, any kind of rejection, hurt, that you would come to know God, El Roi, as your strong tower. As we go through this book and we learn the names of God, perhaps you'll want to write down the name that touches you and keep it in your pocket, to keep it close to you as a daily reminder of who God is and who your strong tower is. Keep a list of those names that touch you, that mean the most to you, so that when you need your God, you'll remember the name to call on in your time of need. So that when you need the God who sees everything, you can call out, El Roi, I need you. When you're needing your Creator, Elohim, Elohim, I need you. When you need the God Most High, El Elyon, meet me where I am, I need you. He wants you to call out to him and to use his name. That's why he gives us his names. I pray that this has been enlightening for you and that you will find release. And I pray that if you are one who, like me, has been a stuffer, that you'll begin to unstuff the stuff that's holding you back from truly knowing your God, from being able to truly let go and to trust your God. If you need someone to talk to, if you need someone to pray with you, reach out to me. Leave me a comment on the video and let me know which name has met your need most since we started the study. If you've purchased a copy of the book, let me know. Or if you're needing help finding a copy, let me know. I would love to help you find a copy. It's so powerful to have the written word in front of you, the book. There's another book that's really good. It doesn't have the same names. It has some of the same names, but there are different ones. The Peace and Power of Knowing God's Name by Kate Arthur has just 15 names in there. This book has some of the same names, but a variety of a few different names. It is The Power of God's Names by Tony Evans. And it goes into depth on some of these names. And I would encourage you also to look into this book. I found this one also on Thrift Books. So anyway, with that, I would just like to say, go with God, go with your El Roi, Elohim, El Elyon. run to your strong tower this week. Be blessed, and I will see you next week for another name of God. This has been Karma with your Thought for Thursday, and be blessed. Thank you for being here.